Okay, another rant. The Mosaic Law. I've never had this question answered to my satisfaction. I've asked that, okay, the Mosaic Law is supposed to be a perfect law, handed down by God. It's supposed to be perfect, infallible, right? If it's perfect, it's infallible. Nothing can go wrong with it. So I posed the question of, well, what if you had two enemies who decided to lie about you? Said you were an adulterer or a thief or something to that effect. And there were two witnesses. So you're accused and whatever, you're put to death. Sometimes back then the whole family was put to death because the kids were considered to be just like the parents. So how is that a perfect law? You can't give me the excuse that men are imperfect, because this is what I've been told, is that men are imperfect, so they interpreted the law wrong. No, that's just a cop-out. That's just like a cop-out in saying that Jehovah will fix things in their own time. It doesn't justify the injustice of if, someone was put to death for something they didn't do. That's not a perfect law. Which also brings me on to the topic of imperfect men. So the witnesses seem to be able to pick and choose what can be thrown aside because of imperfection and what can't. So if it's all because of imperfect men, it has to go for everything. So the Bible was written by imperfect men. So how can I trust that they didn't put their own interpretation on it? Because they were imperfect. And again, if God put words in their head, that's infringing on free will, which I covered before. But yeah, so imperfect men wrote the Bible. So how do we know what they wrote wasn't their own ideas? And just in general with history, everyone rewrites their own history. History has been rewritten to fit an agenda. It's been proven. Kings will rewrite their history so that they don't look bad to future generations. They write themselves up as, this great mighty king, when sometimes they weren't. History nowadays is being rewritten. We have the really right wing rewriting our founders, the founders of this country's history. They weren't religious. You can see it in their writings. They wanted a God-free country. That's why they had separation of church and state, and that is totally being rewritten now. So if you're gonna pull the imperfect men card, it's got to be applied across the board to everything. It can't just pick and choose what what that applies to. And yeah, so that's my rant for tonight. And if anyone can explain to me, how the Mosaic Law was a perfect law, I would love to hear it. Because so far, every time I've asked, I only got one response, and that was that men are imperfect, and that just doesn't do it. And everyone else has said they'd research it and never gotten back to me. Mostly my family. It's been about 5 or 6 years. I've asked it 3 or 4 times, and no one's ever gotten back to me. Okay, so my other point about history is Judas Iscariot. He betrayed Jesus. But if he hadn't betrayed Jesus, Jesus wouldn't have been put to death, right? So he had to do that in order for Jesus to be put to death. So how do we know that he didn't do that at the request of Jesus? Maybe he knew this was going to be his part to play for Jesus to follow through with, his sacrifice. We don't know. We weren't there. We just know what's written, and it's written by imperfect men. So this is what I struggle with. And the books of the Bible were chosen by imperfect men who picked and choose what books they wanted to fit their agenda. And I had, my mom said, like, well, Jehovah directed their hand. And it's like, why would he direct a bunch of Romans to pick these books of the Bible when they weren't even, right? That's the beginnings of Catholicism there, isn't it? I don't know. I don't know my history real well, but why would he do that? And if he did that again, that's infringing on their free will. So, just some more points I'm throwing out there. Please feel free to give me feedback, because these are things that I think about a lot, I struggle with, and I just haven't had an answer that can satisfy me yet. So, please talk back to me.